The hotel receipt fell from Kenia's purse like a confession written in corporate letterhead. $437 at the Lakeside Resort, dated last weekend, the same weekend she claimed to be visiting her sister in Chicago. My name is David Mitchell, and I've spent 15 years as a forensic accountant specializing in divorce mediation. I've seen every lie, every hidden asset, every creative accounting trick desperate spouses use to screw each other over. I thought I'd seen it all until I discovered my own wife was playing the game better than any client I'd ever represented. The first red flag came on a Tuesday morning in March. Kenia bounced into the kitchen wearing her favorite sundress, the one she usually saved for special occasions, humming some pop song I didn't recognize. She kissed my cheek with unusual enthusiasm and announced she was going on a girls' trip to Chicago with her sister Emma and their college friend Lisa. "When did you plan this?" I asked, looking up from my laptop where I was reviewing a particularly nasty custody case. "Oh, you know how it is with Emma? She just decides things last minute. We're leaving Thursday, back Sunday night. Just some shopping, maybe catch a show." Kenia's voice had that artificially bright tone she used when she was excited about something, or lying. After 22 years of marriage, I knew the difference. "Sounds expensive," I said, returning to my screen. "Which hotel?" "The Palmer House. Emma's treating us. You know how she likes to show off since the promotion." I nodded absently, but something nagged at me. Emma was notoriously cheap, and Lisa had been complaining about money troubles since her husband's construction business tanked. A weekend at the Palmer House didn't fit their usual pattern of budget motels and fast food. Thursday morning, Kenia left with 2 suitcases and enough makeup to supply a Broadway production. She kissed me goodbye with the same theatrical enthusiasm, promising to bring back deep dish pizza and some trinket from Navy Pier. By Thursday afternoon, my forensic accountant instincts had kicked in. I pulled up our joint credit card account online, something I rarely bothered with since Kenia handled most of our day-to-day expenses. The merchant codes told a different story than her itinerary. No charges at the Palmer House. No Chicago restaurants or shops. Instead, I found a hotel folio from the Lakeshore Resort in Wisconsin, a romantic getaway spot about 3 hours north. My hands shook as I cross-referenced the dates. The charges lined up perfectly with Kenia's supposed girls' trip. But the Lakeshore Resort wasn't exactly a place you'd take your sister and college roommate. It specialized in couples packages and honeymoon suites. I stared at the screen for a long time, watching the cursor blink in the search field. Part of me wanted to close the laptop and pretend I'd never seen the charges. The other part, the part that had built a career on following paper trails to their inevitable conclusions, needed to know the truth. I installed a vehicle telematics retriever on Kenia's car months ago when she started working late more often. It was supposed to be for insurance discounts, but the GPS tracking feature had come in handy when she claimed to be stuck in traffic during suspiciously long commutes. Now I pulled up the breadcrumb trail from Thursday morning. The route was clear as daylight, straight north to the Lakeshore Resort, no detours to Chicago. She'd lied about everything. Friday evening, I drove to Wisconsin myself. The resort sat on a pristine lake surrounded by pine trees, the kind of place Kenia and I used to dream about visiting when we were young and broke. Now she was here with someone else, spending money we'd saved for our daughter's college tuition. I parked across the road and waited. At sunset, they emerged from cabin 12, walking hand in hand toward the lake. Kenia wore the blue dress I'd bought her for our anniversary last year. The man beside her was tall, dark-haired, wearing khakis and a polo shirt like some country club prince. I recognized him immediately, Dr. Marcus Chen, a pharmaceutical trial coordinator who'd been consulting on one of my fraud cases 6 months ago. He specialized in managing clinical trials for experimental drugs, controlling records, managing data, silencing whistleblowers when trials went wrong. We'd worked together to expose a kickback scheme at a medical research facility. He'd seemed professional, ethical, dedicated to his work. Apparently, he was also dedicated to sleeping with other men's wives. I took photos with my phone's telephoto lens, Kenia laughing at something he whispered in her ear, his hand on her lower back as they walked. A kiss by the water that lasted long enough for me to capture from 3 different angles. Each click of the shutter felt like another nail in the coffin of my marriage. Back in my car, I sat in the parking lot and did what any good forensic accountant would do. I followed the money. Dr. Chen's financial records were partially accessible through the medical database I used for fraud investigations. What I found made my blood boil. He'd been siphoning funds from pharmaceutical trial budgets into a shell LLC for months. The company was registered under a fake name, but the expenses were clear. Hotel rooms, restaurant bills, jewelry purchases, even a weekend trip to Napa Valley that coincided with another one of Kenia's mysterious disappearances. He'd been funding their entire affair with stolen money, and my wife had been happy to let him. I sent the time-stamped photos to Dr. Chen's wife through an encrypted messaging app. Her response came within minutes. "Thank you. I've suspected for months. Can we meet?" Dr. Chen's wife, Jennifer, turned out to be a sharp woman with her own suspicions and evidence. She'd found hotel receipts, credit card statements, even love letters Kenia had written on expensive stationery. We agreed to coordinate our evidence collection silently, building parallel cases that would destroy both our cheating spouses. Sunday night, Kenia came home glowing with what she claimed was the rejuvenating power of a girls' weekend. She showed me a shopping bag from a Chicago boutique and a refrigerator magnet from Navy Pier, props she'd obviously picked up at a highway rest stop. "How was the Palmer House?" I asked. "Oh, beautiful. You'd love the lobby. Very historic." She busied herself unpacking, avoiding eye contact. "And Emma picked up the tab?" "Every penny. You know how she is about treating family." I nodded and smiled, playing the role of the trusting husband while my divorce petition sat in my briefcase, already filed and ready for service. I'd attached ledger anomalies showing Dr. Chen's financial crimes, evidence that would not only destroy him professionally but potentially land him in federal prison. "I'm going to take a shower," Kenia said, heading upstairs with her suitcases. The drive was exhausting. I waited until I heard the water running, then set up my laptop and projector in the living room. By the time Kenia came downstairs in her bathrobe, hair still damp, I had everything ready. "David, what's all this?" She stopped in the doorway, staring at the projection screen I'd set up facing the couch. "Your surprise," I said, hitting play. The photos filled the screen in high definition. Kenia and Dr. Chen holding hands, kissing by the lake, entering and leaving cabin 12 together. The hotel receipts, credit card statements, and GPS tracking data scrolled past in a damning timeline that covered 6 months of lies. Kenia's face went white, then red, then white again. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again like a fish gasping for air. "David, I can explain." "No need." I handed her the divorce papers. "You've explained enough." The doorbell rang before she could respond. I opened it to find a process server with papers for Dr. Chen, who apparently was parked in our driveway in his BMW, probably expecting to pick Kenia up for another romantic evening. "Dr. Marcus Chen?" the server asked, looking past me to where the good doctor was climbing out of his car. "That's him," I said helpfully. What happened next was beautiful in its precision. Jennifer Chen had filed her own divorce suit, including detailed documentation of her husband's controlled substance fraud, pharmacy inventory diversions, and embezzlement from clinical trials. The FBI had been notified. Federal agents were already at his clinic, executing search warrants. Dr. Chen's face went through the same color changes as Kenia's when the process server handed him the papers. He looked at me, then at Kenia standing in the doorway in her bathrobe, then at the federal agents pulling up in unmarked cars. "You son of a bitch," he said to me. "You set this up. Actually, you set it up when you started stealing drug trial money to pay for hotel rooms. I just documented it." I smiled. That's what forensic accountants do. The next morning brought a parade of consequences that unfolded with the mathematical precision I'd always appreciated in my professional life. Dr. Chen's medical license was suspended pending investigation. His clinic was placed in receivership. The state medical board received a comprehensive dossier detailing every financial irregularity, every falsified record, every patient who'd been put at risk by his greed. Kenia sat at our kitchen table, still in her bathrobe, staring at the divorce papers like they were written in a foreign language. Our daughter, Jessica, home from college for spring break, had witnessed enough of the previous night's drama to piece together the basics. "Mom, is it true?" Jessica asked. "Were you really cheating with that doctor guy?" Kenia's composure finally cracked. "It's complicated, honey. Marriage isn't always what it seems from the outside. Your father and I have been growing apart for years." "Growing apart?" I laughed, a harsh sound that surprised even me. "Is that what we're calling it? Because from where I sit, it looks like you were growing closer to someone else's bank account." "That's not fair, David. Marcus and I connected on an emotional level, something I haven't felt with you in years." "Marcus?" Jessica's voice rose. "You're on a first-name basis with the guy who was stealing money to take you on dates?" "Mom? What the hell?" "Watch your language, young lady." "Watch my language? You've been lying to all of us for months, and you're worried about my language?" I poured myself coffee and watched the argument unfold. Kenia had always been good at deflecting blame, turning herself into the victim in any situation, but Jessica was 20 years old, studying psychology at Northwestern, and she wasn't buying it. "Dad, what happens now?" Jessica asked. Now your mother finds herself a lawyer, because mine is very good at his job. I sat down across from Kenia. The divorce is straightforward. Illinois is a no-fault state, but adultery still matters when it comes to asset division, especially when the adultery involves criminal activity. Kenia's phone buzzed constantly with text messages. I assumed they were from Dr. Chen, but when she finally answered one, her face went even paler. "What is it?" I asked. "Emma. She says people are calling her, asking about our girls' trip to Chicago. Someone told her we were never there." Probably Jennifer Chen. Oh, she's been very thorough in her fact-checking. I smiled. "Did you know she's a paralegal? Turns out she's almost as good at investigation as I am." The doorbell rang again. This time it was Kenia's sister Emma, looking furious and embarrassed in equal measure. "Kenia, what the hell have you done? I've got reporters calling me about some fake alibi. My husband is livid. You used me as your cover story without even telling me?" "Emma, please, let me explain." "Explain what? That you've been cheating on David and dragging me into your lies? Do you have any idea what this does to my reputation? I work in public relations, Kenia. My credibility is everything." I excused myself and went to my home office, where I had a video call scheduled with Jennifer Chen and our respective attorneys. The plan we'd developed was elegant in its simplicity: coordinate our divorce proceedings to maximize the criminal exposure for both our cheating spouses. "The FBI raid turned up exactly what we expected," Jennifer reported. "Marcus had been skimming money from 3 different clinical trials, falsifying patient records to cover shortfalls, even selling unused experimental drugs on the black market. The federal prosecutor is talking about wire fraud, conspiracy, and controlled substance violations. My attorney, Patricia Williams, had been handling high-stakes divorces for 20 years. She looked pleased. "This gives us tremendous leverage. Kenia is going to find it very difficult to claim any marital assets when her boyfriend was funding their affair with stolen money." "What about the shell company?" I asked. "Frozen assets, pending criminal investigation. Marcus won't be able to afford a decent defense attorney, much less spousal support for Kenia." Through my office window, I could see Emma's car still in the driveway. Raised voices carried from the kitchen, where Kenia was apparently getting a reality check from her sister about the consequences of her choices. My phone rang. The caller ID showed my best friend Tom Bradley, who'd been my workout partner and confidant for 15 years. "David, man, I just heard. Is it true about Kenia and that doctor?" "Unfortunately, yes." "Jesus, I'm sorry. What can I do?" "Nothing right now. Just be prepared for things to get ugly. Kenia's going to need allies, and she's going to ask our friends to choose sides." Tom was quiet for a moment. "You know I've got your back, right? Whatever you need." "I appreciate that." But even as I said it, I knew Tom was wrong about having my back. Within a week, the social dynamics of our friend group had shifted in ways I hadn't anticipated. It started with the Hendersons, a couple we'd been close to for years. Mike Henderson worked in pharmaceutical sales, and he'd done business with Dr. Chen's clinic. When the criminal investigation became public, Mike panicked about guilt by association and started distancing himself from anyone connected to the scandal. "It's nothing personal, David," he said when I ran into him at the grocery store. "But with the federal investigation and all, my company thinks it's better if I avoid any appearance of impropriety. Mike, I'm the one who exposed the fraud. I'm helping the FBI build their case." I know. But Kenia was involved, and you're still married to her, and it's just complicated." The Hendersons stopped returning our calls. Then the Johnsons did the same. By the end of the month, our entire social circle had evaporated like morning mist. 20 years of friendships gone because people were afraid of being associated with scandal. The only exception was Tom Bradley, who seemed to be enjoying the drama more than a decent friend should. "You've got to admit, it's kind of exciting," he said over beers at our usual bar, "like something out of a movie. Cheating wife, criminal boyfriend, federal investigation. You're like the hero in a thriller novel." "It doesn't feel heroic, Tom. It feels like my life is falling apart." "But you're winning, right? You're going to take her for everything in the divorce." His enthusiasm made me uncomfortable. Tom had been divorced twice himself, both times acrimoniously, and he seemed to view my situation as validation of his own cynical worldview about marriage. "It's not about winning," I said. "It's about justice." "Same thing, isn't it?" 3 weeks after the initial explosion, I learned that Tom Bradley had been having regular coffee dates with Kenia. He claimed he was just being a supportive friend during a difficult time, but his sudden interest in my wife's emotional well-being struck me as suspicious. I confronted him at his house on a Saturday morning. Tom lived in a bachelor pad that looked like a catalog for midlife crisis accessories, leather furniture, expensive electronics, a wet bar that saw more action than most nightclubs. "We need to talk," I said when he answered the door. "Sure, come in. Want a beer? I know it's early, but why are you having coffee with my wife?" Tom's casual demeanor shifted slightly. "She's going through a rough time, David. She needed someone to talk to. She has a therapist for that. She has her sister. Why does she need my best friend?" "Look, I know this is awkward, but Kenia and I have always gotten along well. She's scared, confused, dealing with a lot of guilt. I'm just trying to help." I studied his face, looking for tells the way I did when questioning witnesses in fraud cases. Tom was hiding something, but I couldn't quite pin down what. "Help her with what, exactly?" "Processing everything, understanding her options. You know, emotional support." "Her options?" Tom poured himself a scotch despite the early hour. "The divorce, the criminal investigation, the media attention. She's worried about Jessica, about her reputation, about what happens next. And you're qualified to advise her on these matters because I've been through it twice, remember? I know what it's like when your life explodes and everyone you thought was a friend suddenly disappears." There was truth in that, but something else too. A smugness in his tone that I'd never noticed before. "Tom, are you attracted to my wife?" He laughed, but it sounded forced. "Jesus, David, what kind of question is that?" "A direct one. Are you attracted to Kenia?" "She's an attractive woman. I'm not blind. But that doesn't mean..." "It doesn't mean what? That you're not trying to swoop in while she's vulnerable. That you're not positioning yourself as the understanding friend who'll be there when the dust settles?" Tom's face flushed. "You're being paranoid." "Am I? Because from where I sit, it looks like you're enjoying this whole situation a little too much. My marriage implodes, and suddenly you're Kenia's shoulder to cry on." "Maybe if you'd been a better husband, she wouldn't have needed to find comfort elsewhere." The words hung in the air like smoke from a gun. Tom realized immediately that he'd crossed a line, but it was too late to take it back. "Excuse me? I didn't mean that the way it sounded." "How did you mean it?" Tom finished his scotch and poured another. "Look, Kenia's told me some things. About how distant you've been, how focused on work, how you never really listened to her needs." "Kenia told you this during your supportive coffee dates?" "She's lonely, David. Has been for years. Maybe if you'd paid attention to your wife instead of your spreadsheets, she wouldn't have been vulnerable to some smooth-talking doctor." I felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. "So, this is my fault?" "I'm not saying it's your fault. I'm saying there are always two sides to every story. And Kenia's side is that I drove her into the arms of a criminal by being too focused on my career? She didn't put it that way, but yeah, essentially." I looked around Tom's apartment, taking in the expensive furniture, the wall-mounted TV, the framed photos of his ex-wives that he kept like trophies. Tom Bradley, twice divorced, eternally bitter, always looking for validation that marriage was a sucker's game. "You know what I think, Tom? I think you've been waiting for this to happen. Waiting for my marriage to fail so you could feel better about your own failures." "That's bullshit." "Is it? Because you seem awfully eager to comfort my wife and explain why her infidelity is really my fault." Tom stood up, his face red with anger and alcohol. "Maybe it is your fault. Maybe Kenia deserves better than a husband who treats her like another client in his precious fraud cases." "And maybe she deserves you? Is that where this is going?" "At least I'd appreciate her." There it was, the truth finally out in the open. Tom Bradley, my best friend for 15 years, had been harboring feelings for my wife and saw her infidelity as an opportunity. "Get out," Tom said. "Gladly." I headed for the door, then turned back. "Tom? When Kenia's done using you for emotional support and moves on to the next guy, remember this conversation. Remember how you threw away 15 years of friendship for a woman who cheats on her husband with criminals." "Fuck you, David." "No, Tom. Fuck you." I drove home in a rage that surprised me with its intensity. Losing my wife to a criminal was bad enough. Losing my best friend to his own pathetic fantasies was worse. But what really burned was the realization that Tom wasn't the only one who'd turned against me. Over the next few days, I discovered that Kenia had been working the phones, reaching out to mutual friends with her version of events. The story she told painted me as a cold, distant workaholic who'd driven her into the arms of another man through years of emotional neglect. Some people bought it, others didn't. But the effect was to split our social circle into camps, with me increasingly isolated on one side and Kenia gathering sympathy on the other. The breaking point came at Jessica's college graduation party. We'd planned it months ago, before the world exploded, and Jessica insisted we go through with it despite everything. She'd worked hard for her psychology degree and wanted to celebrate with friends and family. Kenia showed up with Tom Bradley as her date. Not officially, of course. He was just there as a supportive friend during a difficult time. But they sat together, whispered together, and presented themselves as a united front against the cruel husband who'd exposed his wife's affair instead of working things out quietly. I watched our former friends choose sides in real time. The Hendersons avoided me entirely. The Johnsons made polite small talk before gravitating toward Kenia's table. Even some of Jessica's college friends seemed to view me with suspicion, as if I were the villain in this particular drama. The final straw came when Tom approached me at the bar. "This doesn't have to be ugly, David. Jessica deserves better than watching her parents destroy each other in public." "You're absolutely right," I said. "She deserves better than watching her mother's boyfriend give advice to her mother's new boyfriend about how to handle the situation. I'm trying to help." "You're trying to fuck my wife, Tom. Let's not pretend this is about helping anyone." Several people overheard, including Jessica. The party atmosphere died as conversation stopped and heads turned in our direction. "Dad," Jessica said, approaching us with a warning tone. "It's okay, honey. Tom was just leaving." "Actually, I think you're the one who should leave," Tom said. "Kenia's been through enough without you making a scene at your daughter's party." "My daughter's party? At my house? That I'm paying for." "The house you might not own much longer once the divorce is finalized." I felt the rage building like pressure in a boiler. Tom was right, and he knew it. Kenia's attorney was pushing for a 50-50 split of assets, arguing that her adultery was irrelevant under Illinois no-fault divorce law. My attorney disagreed, but legal battles were expensive and outcomes uncertain. "You know what, Tom? You're right. I should leave. But first, let me share something with our friends." I raised my voice so everyone at the party could hear. "I'd like to thank Tom Bradley for his friendship and support during this difficult time. Tom's been having regular coffee dates with my wife, offering her emotional support and advice on how to handle our divorce. He's been such a good friend that he's volunteered to escort her to social events and provide a shoulder to cry on whenever she needs it." The crowd was dead silent now, watching the train wreck unfold. Tom's been especially helpful in explaining why Kenia's 6-month affair with a criminal was really my fault for being too focused on work. According to Tom, I drove my wife into the arms of a man who stole money from cancer patients to pay for their hotel rooms. Apparently, that's what happens when you're not emotionally available enough. "David, stop!" Jessica pleaded. But I was beyond stopping. Tom's also been generous enough to share his expertise on marriage, having been divorced twice himself. He's helped Kenia understand that infidelity isn't really about betrayal or dishonesty. It's about finding the emotional connection you can't get at home. Tom's face was purple with rage and embarrassment. "You son of a bitch!" The best part is that Tom genuinely believes he's being a good friend. He thinks he's helping. He doesn't realize that Kenia is using him for emotional support the same way she used Dr. Chen for financial support. He's just another mark in a long line of men who think they can save her from the consequences of her own choices. I looked around the room at the shocked faces of people who'd known us for years. "So thank you, Tom, for showing me who my real friends are. And thank you, Kenia, for showing me who you really are. It's been educational." I walked out of my own house, leaving behind 22 years of marriage, 15 years of friendship, and most of the social connections I'd built over 2 decades of adult life. The next 6 months were the loneliest of my life, but also the most focused. I threw myself into building the strongest possible case against both Kenia and Dr. Chen, working with federal prosecutors to ensure that justice was served on multiple fronts. Dr. Chen's criminal trial was a masterpiece of forensic accounting. I testified as an expert witness, walking the jury through the paper trail of fraud, embezzlement, and patient endangerment that had funded his affair with my wife. The evidence was overwhelming: falsified records, diverted medications, kickbacks from pharmaceutical companies, and a shell company that existed solely to launder stolen money into luxury expenses. The prosecution painted a picture of a man so arrogant and greedy that he'd put cancer patients at risk to pay for weekend getaways with his mistress. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Dr. Chen was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $2.3 million in restitution to the Medical Research Foundation he'd defrauded. His medical license was permanently revoked. His assets were seized, including the BMW he'd driven to my house that night and the expensive jewelry he'd bought for Kenia with stolen money. Kenia's divorce case became more complicated. Her attorney argued that she'd been an unwitting victim of Dr. Chen's crimes, unaware that their relationship was funded by embezzled money. My attorney countered with evidence that Kenia had been actively involved in the deception, helping to create false alibis and even suggesting ways to hide their expenses from their respective spouses. The turning point came when Jennifer Chen testified about conversations she'd recorded between Kenia and Dr. Chen. In one particularly damaging exchange, Kenia suggested that he could claim certain expenses as legitimate business costs, demonstrating knowledge of his fraudulent activities. The judge awarded me 75% of our marital assets, including the house, both cars, and most of our investment accounts. Kenia was left with her personal belongings, a small savings account, and the burden of finding a way to support herself without her husband's income or her boyfriend's stolen money. But the financial victory felt hollow compared to the social devastation I'd experienced. Tom Bradley had indeed become Kenia's boyfriend, just as I'd predicted. They moved in together 6 weeks after our divorce was finalized, proving that his supportive friendship had been a courtship all along. Most of our mutual friends had chosen sides, and most had chosen Kenia's. The narrative she'd crafted about the emotionally distant husband who'd driven her to infidelity had resonated with people who preferred simple explanations to complicated truths. I found myself starting over at age 45. New apartment, new social circle, new routines that didn't include the people I'd considered family for 2 decades. It was liberating and terrifying in equal measure. The opportunity for revenge came from an unexpected source, the FBI's Forensic Accounting Division. Agent Patricia Morrison contacted me about joining a task force focused on healthcare fraud, specifically targeting schemes similar to Dr. Chen's operation. We've identified at least 12 other cases with similar patterns, she explained during our interview. Pharmaceutical trial coordinators with access to controlled substances and research budgets using their positions to fund personal expenses. We need someone with your expertise to help us build cases. The work was fascinating and important, but it also gave me access to information that would prove useful in settling old scores. During my investigation of a clinical trial fraud in Wisconsin, I discovered something interesting about Tom Bradley's consulting business. Tom worked as a medical device sales representative, calling on doctors and hospitals throughout the Midwest. His expense reports showed a pattern of inflated costs and questionable charges that looked suspiciously familiar. A little deeper digging revealed that Tom had been padding his expenses for years, claiming personal meals as business dinners, billing mileage for trips that never happened, even charging his company for hotel rooms during his romantic getaways with Kenia. The amounts weren't as large as Dr. Chen's embezzlement, but they were substantial enough to constitute felony fraud. More importantly, Tom's company had a zero-tolerance policy for expense account abuse, and they took a dim view of employees who stole from them. I compiled a comprehensive report documenting Tom's fraudulent expenses over the past 3 years. The evidence was ironclad. Credit card records, GPS data, hotel receipts, restaurant bills, even social media posts that contradicted his claimed business activities. I sent the report to Tom's company anonymously, along with supporting documentation and a detailed analysis of the fraud patterns. Within a week, Tom was fired and facing criminal charges for theft and wire fraud. The timing was perfect. Tom had just moved in with Kenia, taking on financial responsibility for her support while she looked for work. Suddenly, he was unemployed and facing legal bills he couldn't afford. Kenia called me, furious and desperate. "You did this, didn't you? You got Tom fired." "I have no idea what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me, David. This has your fingerprints all over it. Forensic accounting, expense report analysis, anonymous tips to corporate security. It's exactly the kind of petty revenge you'd pull." If Tom was stealing from his employer, that's between him and his employer. I had nothing to do with his poor judgment. He's facing criminal charges because of you. He's facing criminal charges because he committed crimes, just like your boyfriend Dr. Chen faced criminal charges because he committed crimes. There's a pattern here, Kenia, but it's not my pattern. The call ended with Kenia screaming obscenities and threats that I recorded for potential future use. Within a month, Tom had pled guilty to reduced charges and been sentenced to 2 years of probation and full restitution to his former employer. The financial strain destroyed his relationship with Kenia, who moved out and filed for bankruptcy. But my revenge wasn't complete. I still had scores to settle with the friends who'd abandoned me, the people who'd chosen to believe Kenia's lies rather than face uncomfortable truths about infidelity and consequences. The Hendersons were first. Mike Henderson's pharmaceutical sales business depended on relationships with doctors and medical facilities. When several of his biggest clients were investigated for prescription fraud, Mike found himself associated with yet another medical scandal. His company decided that Mike's judgment was questionable and his client relationships were a liability. He was quietly pushed out and replaced with a younger representative who didn't carry the baggage of failed due diligence. The Johnsons were more challenging, but their weakness was their teenage son's college ambitions. When Brad Johnson applied for admission to Northwestern University, his application was flagged for additional review. An anonymous tip suggested that his volunteer hours at a local charity might be fabricated, and his essay about overcoming adversity might be plagiarized. The investigation revealed that Brad had indeed inflated his community service and borrowed heavily from online sources for his personal statement. Northwestern withdrew their acceptance offer, and the scandal spread to other schools where he'd applied. Brad ended up at a community college, and his parents blamed me for destroying their son's future. They were right to blame me, though they could never prove it. I'd simply applied the same investigative techniques I used in fraud cases to expose the lies and exaggerations that people use to get ahead in life. One by one, the friends who'd chosen Kenia's side found themselves facing consequences for their own questionable decisions. Business deals fell through when partners discovered hidden problems. Job applications were rejected when background checks revealed unflattering information. Social relationships soured when secrets were exposed at exactly the wrong moments. I never did anything illegal. I simply ensured that the truth came to light in ways that were maximally inconvenient for people who'd chosen to embrace comfortable lies rather than difficult realities. 2 years after my divorce was finalized, I received an invitation that surprised me. Jessica was getting married. Despite everything that had happened between her parents, she wanted both of us at her wedding. The ceremony was small and elegant, held at a country club outside Chicago. Jessica looked beautiful in her grandmother's wedding dress, radiant with the kind of happiness that comes from making good choices about the people you trust with your heart. Kenia attended with her new boyfriend, a middle-aged accountant named Robert, who seemed pleasant enough in a bland, forgettable way. Tom Bradley was notably absent, having moved to Arizona after his legal troubles made him unemployable in the Midwest. I sat on the bride's side, surrounded by Jessica's college friends and her fiancé's family. Most of our old friends were there too, occupying an awkward middle ground between Kenia's section and mine. The Hendersons nodded politely but didn't approach. The Johnsons avoided eye contact entirely. During the reception, Jessica pulled me aside for a private conversation. "Dad, I need to ask you something, and I want an honest answer." "Of course." "Did you destroy Tom Bradley's career?" I looked at my daughter, this brilliant young woman who'd inherited my analytical mind and her mother's emotional intelligence. She deserved the truth. Tom destroyed his own career by stealing from his employer. I just made sure the right people found out about it. "What about the Hendersons, the Johnsons, all those other people who had problems after they chose Mom's side in the divorce?" "People who make bad decisions eventually face consequences for those decisions. Sometimes they need help connecting their choices to their outcomes." Jessica studied my face with the same intensity I brought to forensic investigations. "You've been systematically destroying the lives of everyone who turned against you. I've been ensuring that people face the natural consequences of their actions. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Because from where I sit, it looks like you've spent 2 years plotting revenge against anyone who didn't support you during the divorce." I considered my words carefully. Jessica was the most important person in my life, and I didn't want to lose her too. "Your mother had an affair with a criminal who stole money from cancer patients. When that came to light, instead of accepting responsibility for her choices, she created a narrative that made me the villain. She convinced our friends that her infidelity was my fault, that I'd driven her to it through emotional neglect." "Maybe you did." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What?" "Maybe you did drive her to it. Maybe you were emotionally distant and focused on work and not paying attention to what she needed. Maybe her affair was wrong, but maybe it was also understandable." I stared at my daughter, seeing Kenia's influence in her words. "You believe that?" "I believe that relationships are complicated and that there are always multiple perspectives on what went wrong. I also believe that you've spent 2 years destroying people's lives because they didn't automatically take your side in a messy situation. Those people chose to believe comfortable lies rather than face difficult truths. They decided that adultery and fraud were acceptable as long as they could blame the victim for creating the circumstances. Or maybe they decided that their friend was going through a difficult time and needed support, and that marriage problems are usually more complicated than innocent victim versus evil villain." Jessica's words forced me to confront something I'd been avoiding for 2 years, the possibility that my quest for justice had become something darker and more personal. "Do you think I'm the villain in this story?" I asked. "I think you're a man who was deeply hurt and who responded by using his considerable skills to hurt other people in return. I think you've become so focused on proving that you were right and everyone else was wrong that you've lost sight of what actually matters." "Which is?" "Moving on, building a new life, finding happiness that doesn't depend on other people's misery." We were interrupted by the band starting the father-daughter dance. As we moved around the dance floor, I thought about Jessica's words and about the choices I'd made since my marriage ended. She was right, of course. I had become the villain in many people's stories, the shadowy figure who appeared whenever someone's past mistakes caught up with them. I'd told myself it was about justice, about ensuring that actions had consequences. But the truth was simpler and more human. I'd been hurt, and I'd wanted other people to hurt too. After the dance, I found myself at the bar next to Robert, Kenia's new boyfriend. He was a quiet man with kind eyes and the patient demeanor of someone who'd learned not to rush into judgment. "You're David," he said. "I've heard a lot about you." "I'm sure you have. All of it bad, I assume." Robert smiled. "Some of it. But I've also done my own research. Forensic accounting, healthcare fraud investigation, expert witness in federal cases. You've built quite a reputation in your field." "Kenia told you about the divorce?" "She told me her version. I've formed my own opinions based on what I've observed." "Which is?" "That she's a woman who makes impulsive decisions and then creates elaborate justifications for them. That she has trouble accepting responsibility for the consequences of her choices. That she's attracted to men who can provide financial security and emotional validation in equal measure." I studied Robert's face, looking for signs of judgment or hostility. Instead, I saw the calm assessment of someone who'd learned to see people clearly. "And you're okay with that?" "I'm okay with who she is now, which is a woman who's learned some hard lessons about the cost of deception. She's not the same person who had an affair with Dr. Chen. People can change if they want to badly enough." "Do you think she's changed?" Robert considered the question seriously. "I think she's scared enough of the consequences to make better choices going forward. Whether that constitutes real change or just enlightened self-interest, I suppose we'll find out." As the evening wound down, I found myself talking to some of our old friends for the first time in 2 years. The conversations were awkward but civil, marked by the careful politeness of people who'd shared a history but no longer shared trust. Mike Henderson approached me during the final dance, looking older and more tired than I remembered. "David, I owe you an apology." "For what?" "For abandoning you when you needed friends most. I was scared about the business implications, worried about guilt by association, and I took the easy way out." "You had every right to protect yourself and your family." "Maybe, but I should have found a way to do that without turning my back on 20 years of friendship. What happened to you could have happened to any of us. We should have supported you instead of running away." I shook Mike's hand, feeling a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying begin to lift. "Thank you for saying that. For what it's worth, I never believed Kenia's version of events. I knew you well enough to know that you weren't the kind of husband who'd drive his wife to infidelity through neglect, but it was easier to go along with her narrative than to deal with the complicated reality." As I drove home that night, I thought about the conversation with Mike and about Jessica's earlier words. My daughter was right. I'd spent 2 years focused on proving that I was the victim and everyone else was wrong. But being right hadn't made me happy, and destroying other people's lives hadn't healed the wounds from my own losses. The next morning, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible 2 years earlier. I called Kenia. "David, is everything wrong? Is Jessica okay?" "Jessica's fine. I'm calling about us." "Us? There is no us. We've been divorced for 2 years." "I know. But we're going to be connected for the rest of our lives through Jessica. We're going to be grandparents together someday. We need to find a way to coexist that doesn't involve ongoing warfare." Kenia was quiet for a long moment. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I'm tired of being angry. I'm tired of looking for ways to punish people for disappointing me. I'm tired of being the villain in everyone else's story." You were never the villain, David. You were just hurt. And when you're hurt, you tend to strike back with everything you've got." It was the closest thing to an apology I was likely to get from Kenia, and the closest thing to an admission of wrongdoing she was capable of making. "Robert seems like a good man," I said. "He is. He's patient and kind and honest about who he is. He's not trying to be anyone else or impress anyone or prove anything. He's just steady. That's what you need." "Yes. And David, for what it's worth, I am sorry. Not just for the affair, but for the way I handled everything afterward. I was scared and defensive, and I said things that weren't fair. You didn't deserve what I put you through. Thank you for saying that. Are you happy? In your new life, I mean." I considered the question. Was I happy? I had meaningful work that made a difference in the world. I had a relationship with my daughter that had survived the worst crisis of our family's history. I had financial security and professional respect, and the satisfaction of knowing that I'd stood up for myself when it mattered most. But I was also alone in ways I'd never been before, isolated by my own choices as much as by other people's betrayals. I'd won the war, but lost most of the things that had made victory worthwhile. "I'm working on it," I said finally. "Me too." 6 months after Jessica's wedding, I received a call that would change the trajectory of my new life. Agent Patricia Morrison from the FBI's Healthcare Fraud Division had a proposition that was too interesting to refuse. "We're creating a new task force focused on financial crimes and medical research," she explained during our meeting at the Federal Building in Chicago. "We need someone with your expertise to head up the Forensic Accounting Division. It would be a full-time position based here in Chicago, with travel to investigate cases throughout the Midwest." "What kind of cases?" "Everything from pharmaceutical trial fraud to medical device kickbacks to insurance billing schemes. The healthcare industry loses billions of dollars annually to fraud, and most of it goes undetected because the schemes are too sophisticated for traditional investigators." The job offer was attractive on multiple levels. It would allow me to use my skills for a larger purpose, protecting patients and taxpayers from the kind of predatory behavior I'd exposed in Dr. Chen's case. It would also give me a fresh start professionally, working with people who knew me for my expertise rather than my personal history. "There's one case I'd like you to look at immediately," Agent Morrison continued, sliding a thick file across the table. "It involves a network of clinical trial coordinators who've been manipulating patient data and skimming research funds across multiple states. The lead investigator is someone you've worked with before." I opened the file and saw Dr. Chen's photograph clipped to the first page of documents. Even from federal prison, he was apparently still causing problems. "He's been cooperating with investigators in exchange for a reduced sentence," Agent Morrison explained, providing information about other coordinators who were involved in similar schemes. "The network is larger than we initially thought." Over the next several months, I threw myself into the investigation with the same intensity I'd once brought to my personal revenge campaign. The case was complex and far-reaching, involving dozens of medical facilities, hundreds of patients, and millions of dollars in fraudulent billing. The work was deeply satisfying in ways my private practice had never been. Instead of helping wealthy spouses hide assets from each other, I was protecting vulnerable patients from predatory medical professionals. Instead of documenting infidelity and betrayal, I was exposing corruption that put lives at risk. The investigation also brought me into contact with Jennifer Chen, Dr. Chen's ex-wife, who had become a victim advocate working with patients who'd been harmed by medical fraud. Our shared experience had created an unexpected bond, and we found ourselves working together frequently as the case developed. "It's strange how things work out," Jennifer said during one of our planning meetings. 2 years ago, we were coordinating our divorces and comparing evidence of our spouses' betrayals. Now we're working together to make sure other people don't go through what we went through. Do you ever regret how we handled things? The way we coordinated our revenge?" Jennifer considered the question carefully. "I regret that it was necessary. I regret that Marcus put us in a position where we had to choose between protecting ourselves and protecting him, but I don't regret the choices we made once we knew the truth. Even knowing how it would affect other people, the social fallout, the destroyed friendships, the collateral damage. David, Marcus was stealing money from cancer research to pay for hotel rooms with your wife. He was putting patients at risk to fund his affair. The social fallout from exposing that wasn't our responsibility. It was his." Jennifer was right, but I'd learned to see the situation from multiple perspectives. My quest for justice had been legitimate, but my subsequent campaign of revenge against former friends had crossed lines that I couldn't uncross. The breakthrough in our investigation came from an unexpected source, Tom Bradley. He contacted me through the FBI, offering information about medical device kickbacks he'd witnessed during his sales career. "I know you probably don't want to hear from me," he said during our recorded interview, "but I have information that might be useful to your investigation." Tom looked older and more subdued than I remembered. His legal troubles had aged him, and his relationship with Kenia had ended badly, leaving him financially and emotionally drained. "Why are you coming forward now?" I asked. "Because I've had 2 years to think about the choices I made and the people I hurt. Because I realized that what I did to you was wrong, and what Marcus did to all of us was worse. Because maybe I can do something useful with the information I have." Tom's testimony proved crucial in exposing a network of medical device companies that had been paying illegal kickbacks to doctors in exchange for using their products in unnecessary procedures. The scheme had generated millions in fraudulent billing and subjected thousands of patients to procedures they didn't need. Working with Tom was awkward but productive. We maintained professional courtesy while acknowledging the personal history that made our collaboration complicated. "I owe you an apology," he said after one of our interviews, "for what I did during the divorce, for the things I said, for the way I treated our friendship. You were attracted to my wife and saw an opportunity. It's not the first time that's happened in human history. It was more than that. I was jealous of what you had, even before it fell apart. The stable marriage, the successful career, the respect in the community. When your life exploded, part of me was glad because it meant I wasn't the only one whose relationships had failed. Tom's honesty was uncomfortable, but refreshing. It reminded me of the man I'd been friends with before jealousy and opportunity had corrupted his judgment. "What happened with Kenia?" I asked. She realized I wasn't going to be able to provide the financial security she needed, especially after I lost my job and faced legal bills. She also realized that I was just as flawed as you and Marcus, but without the professional success to compensate for it. "Do you think she loved you?" "I think she loved the idea of me, the supportive friend who understood her pain and validated her choices. But when the reality set in, when she had to deal with my problems instead of just my sympathy, the attraction faded pretty quickly." The investigation concluded 18 months later with indictments against 47 defendants, including doctors, pharmaceutical executives, medical device salespeople, and clinical trial coordinators. The total amount of fraud exceeded $200 million, making it one of the largest healthcare fraud cases in federal history. Dr. Chen's cooperation had been valuable, but it didn't earn him the reduced sentence he'd hoped for. He was transferred to a minimum security facility, but his 12-year sentence remained intact. Kenia testified as a witness in several of the trials, admitting her knowledge of some of Dr. Chen's activities while maintaining that she'd been manipulated rather than complicit. The trials were covered extensively by local and national media, rehashing the personal drama that had started the investigation. But this time, the focus was on the systemic corruption rather than the individual betrayals. I was portrayed as the whistleblower whose personal tragedy had exposed a much larger criminal enterprise. Jessica attended the final sentencing hearing, watching as the last of the defendants received their prison terms. Afterward, we had dinner at a quiet restaurant downtown. "Are you satisfied?" she asked, "now that it's all over and everyone's been held accountable?" "I'm satisfied that justice was served. The people who committed crimes were punished, and the system that enabled them has been reformed. Patients are safer because of the work we did." "But are you happy?" It was the same question Kenia had asked me 2 years earlier, and I still didn't have a simple answer. "I'm content," I said finally. "I have work that matters, a relationship with you that survived everything we've been through, and the knowledge that I stood up for what was right when it counted." "And personally? Are you lonely?" I smiled at my daughter's directness. "Sometimes, but I'm also at peace in ways I wasn't before. I know who I am and what I stand for. I know the difference between justice and revenge, even if it took me a while to learn it." "What about forgiveness? What about it? Have you forgiven Mom? Tom? The friends who turned against you?" I thought about the question seriously. Forgiveness had never been my strong suit, but the past 4 years had taught me something about the cost of carrying grudges. "I've let go of the anger," I said. "I don't wish any of them harm, and I don't spend time thinking about ways to punish them further. Whether that constitutes forgiveness, I'm not sure. It's a start." As we walked back to our cars, Jessica surprised me with a hug that lasted longer than usual. "I'm proud of you, Dad. Not just for the investigation and the convictions, but for the way you've grown through all of this. You could have stayed bitter and vengeful forever, but you chose to channel your pain into something constructive." "I had good teachers," I said, thinking of Agent Morrison, Jennifer Chen, and even Tom Bradley, all of whom had shown me different ways to respond to betrayal and loss. "And good genes," Jessica added with a smile. "Mom always said I got my stubbornness from you." "Among other things." 6 months later, I received an invitation to Jessica's baby shower. She and her husband were expecting their first child, a daughter they planned to name Ruth after my mother. The invitation included a handwritten note. "We want our daughter to know her grandfather and to learn from his example about standing up for what's right." I RSVP'd immediately, looking forward to the next chapter of my life as a grandfather and mentor. The past 4 years had taught me that happiness wasn't about avoiding pain or preventing betrayal. It was about choosing how to respond when life inevitably delivered both. I'd chosen revenge initially, then justice, and finally something closer to wisdom. It had been a long journey from the night I discovered Kenia's affair to this moment of anticipation about meeting my granddaughter, but every step had been necessary to become the man I was now, flawed but honest, wounded but healing, alone but not lonely. The investigation that had consumed 4 years of my life was officially closed, but its impact would continue for decades. New regulations protected patients from fraudulent research. Enhanced oversight prevented the kind of systematic billing fraud that had funded my wife's affair. Medical professionals face stricter penalties for betraying their patients' trust. Most importantly, I'd learned that the best revenge against people who betray you isn't destroying their lives. It's building a better life for yourself and using your experience to protect others from similar betrayals. As I sat in my office, looking at the commendations and awards that covered one wall, I realized that I'd achieved something more valuable than revenge or even justice. I'd found purpose in my pain and meaning in my losses. The phone rang, interrupting my reflection. Agent Morrison had a new case, another network of medical fraudsters who thought they were too smart to get caught. I smiled as I reached for my notebook, ready to prove them wrong. Some people spend their lives avoiding conflict and betrayal. Others, like me, learn to transform those experiences into something useful. I'd been the victim, the villain, and finally the hero of my own story. But the most important role I'd learned to play was simply being myself, a forensic accountant who believed in truth, justice, and the power of following the money to its inevitable conclusion.